Welcome into another episode of Christ in a Culture War. It is your host, Jesse Williams, and I am recording this podcast on a Thursday. I think it's April 23rd. No, I think it's April 24th. Yeah, it's April 24th. I don't even know what day it is. Yeah, April 24th, 2025. So this is the new series, The Narrative of the Bible as a Story. This is episode 2. Episode 1 we did about 10 days ago, and I thought it went well. We covered Genesis 1 through 3. Excuse me while I look down at my computer, because we're going to pull up Genesis chapter 4. And today we're going to be talking about Cain, Abel, the table of the nations, and possibly Noah, just depending on how much we can get through. So I've been sleepy all day, just got done hanging out with my kids, so I am going to be drinking this delicious Rio Monster. So just bear with me. I want to clarify something from the last episode, episode 1. When we were talking about the seed of Satan, I should have mentioned that a lot of people view that seed as being the Antichrist of Revelation that Daniel prophesies also. The man of lawlessness that's talked about in, I want to say, 1st or 2nd Thessalonians, the person that is going to be indwelt by Satan himself, that is going to deceive the nations during the 7-year tribulation. We're going to get into all that when we cover Revelation. So I wanted to clarify that. I also wanted to clarify, and I may have said this on the last pod, but I'm not sure. Eve got her name, it seems, after the fall. Now it's Genesis 3:20, and I really don't like how this is set up on the computer, but we will read it real quick because it's not just an easy backwards and forwards. So after the curse is given, it says the man, who is Adam, called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living. And this is when Adam and Eve were driven out of the garden, and then there's angels that had to guard with the flashing sword, right? So we've gotten through creation, the different theories of creation. We've gotten through the fall, the naming of the animals, right? So now sin has entered the world, and we are separated from God. So now God drives the man and the woman out of the garden so they can't eat from the tree of life. And we are now in chapter 4. And I really would just wish they had an arrow button. I'm using the U Bible version, which is really good on the phone. Not so much on the computer, because it just makes me click Genesis and then the chapter every time. So Genesis 4, we'll start there. We are going to be doing a lot of reading the Bible. Let me just check my levels real quick. We are doing okay. Yeah, so this is going to be, once again, on YouTube. I'm going to promote it on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, right? But starting with episode 2, now that I know this microphone actually works, we're going to be releasing episodes in audio format, hopefully through, it used to be called Anchor. I don't know what it's called now, but I still have the app. I'm going to attempt to load this up on that app, and I know that it'll go to Spotify, but I hope it still goes to Apple. So I haven't looked at it in a while, and they may have put some parameters on there where it's not easily accessible. I don't know. We're going to try it out. Sorry, guys. So we're now in Genesis chapter 4, and we'll just start in verse 1. Now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. Right? So, and that we're going to pause in the middle of the verse. So, we believe that, and I say I believe that Cain and Abel were Adam and Eve's first 2 kids. But it doesn't necessarily say that. And we're not given a timeline of how old Adam is until Seth is born. And we'll see that later on in this study. So then we're going to get to that with Cain, because there's a question that's going to come up about Cain and Cain's wife, and the city and all that. But right now we're just dealing with Cain and Abel. So for this podcast, I'm just going to assume that Cain and Abel were the first two kids. Now they had many, many other kids, I'm sure. And this gets into like how was the earth populated, but we're not given a timeline. And when it says Adam knew his wife, that is a way to say that they did some baby making, right? Husband and wife, they're obeying God in the sense that they're being fruitful and they're multiplying. So in the course of time, I didn't stop in the middle of the verse. Verse 3. In the course of time, Cain brought I cannot read today. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry and his face fell. We're going to stop there. It's interesting that it simply says that Cain brought an offering to the Lord, but it specifies that Abel brought the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions, right? So it's specifying that there's a difference between the level of sacrifice that Cain brought and that Abel brought. It gives us an interesting detail there about maybe why God favored Abel's sacrifice and not Cain's. And when we see what unfolds in the story, it also seems like a heart posture thing, right? So Abel seems to be giving out of regard for the Lord, and it seems like Cain is just bringing it just because he's supposed to, right? But anyways, what we're told in the scripture is that God favored one sacrifice over the other. Verse 6, the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry and why is your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. This is interesting because in other translations, I'm reading from the ESV, watched a beautiful video by the Forgotten Jesus podcast. Absolutely recommend that podcast. Someone put me on that recently, and it is a really good podcast. So, we're reading from the ESV. That's just my preferred one. In other translations, this says that sin is crouching at the door and its desire is for you. But this seems to be more of so the ESV is more of a word-for-word translation than, let's say, the NIV, right? Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it. So sin has entered the world, and God's saying sin is crouching at your door, and its desire is contrary to what is good for you, what is best for you, what I have for you. And so God just warns him. He's like, listen, like, I understand you're upset, but do right. Now, verse 8, Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and they were in the field. Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. I mean, I'm going to say things in this podcast that might sound weird. Like, I'm going to say things like, I wish the Bible would have said this. Now, I want to be clear. I think the Bible is inerrant. I believe that the Bible is the infallible word of God. I think that, yes, there are scribal mistakes in here and there, but I think that we have the Bible we're supposed to have. Every once in a while, I'm just curious and wish that I had more details. Because this seems, on the surface, to be a really petty thing. Like, had this been occurring over and over again, where like God's accepting Abel and not Cain? But obviously, he's super upset. They go out in the field, and he kills him. The first murder. Possibly from the first two children on the planet. Right? The first two people born on earth. Now, is it possible that they weren't the first and the second? Yes, that is possible. The scripture does not say Cain was the firstborn. It just says he's the first one mentioned by name, Abel the second, Seth the third, right? So we're just going off how it's written. Then the Lord said to Cain, we're in verse 9, where is Abel your brother? He said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? It's so funny how people, and we do the same thing, we talk to God sometimes Like God doesn't already know the answer to the question he's asking. We talked about this last week. We talked about how God will ask questions that he already knows the answer to, because I'm going to ruin it for you. He's God, so he knows everything. He sees everything. And the Lord said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground, and now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth." So this is God's decree, right? Where God's saying, all right, you did this. This is the consequences, right? You're going to be a wanderer on the earth. You'll be a fugitive. And the ground's not going to yield its crops to you anymore, right? Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." If I was God, I'd have been like, tough luck. But I'm not God, and that's why I'm not God. Well, among way other many reasons, right? Like, God is God, right? Then the Lord said to him, "Not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold." And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. I'm going to click on this footnote real quick. Nod means wandering. The Bible is incredible. Like, Cain's a wanderer, they called it Nod. East of Eden, east of wherever the Garden of Eden was. And I know we talked about the rivers, and it could be that it's different story for a different time. But the Garden of Eden, with the rivers that it mentions, may have moved locations during the flood. Like, I don't know how that happens, but we're not going to get into that, right? So God puts a mark on Cain, and he's like, no one's going to kill you. So Cain is, once again, has to leave. Cain has to leave just like his father Adam. So this is where it gets controversial. First off, the mark of Cain, people have taken that and ran with it with crazy conspiracy theories. Like, that passes down. By the way, if you hear traffic or whatever, sorry about that. So Cain knew his wife, and we're in verse 17. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. This is not the Enoch with the books of Enoch and then like the great grandfather of Noah. This is a different Enoch. Same name. When he built the city, he called the name of the city after his son Enoch. To Enoch was born Irad. Irad fathered a bunch. They get all the way down to Lamech, right? We're not going to do every name. So there's something interesting in this passage. So we get to this guy named Lamech, and Lamech took 2 wives. So right here, we read in... hold on, I'm losing my train of thought. I'm not losing my train of thought. I'm trying to see how to word this. I believe we talked about, for this is why a man shall leave his father's house, and he and his wife will become one flesh, right? That's established from the beginning. Yeah, so when we're talking about Adam and the woman being created, and talking about, because he said, she's flesh of my flesh, bone of my bone. So already within, let's count these generations. So you have Adam, Cain, Enoch, Irad, some dude's name I can't pronounce, another dude's name I can't pronounce, and Lamech. We're in the 7th generation, right? And already people are taking extra wives. And he had 2 wives, and we're going to skip that. And then Adah was the name of one of his wives, and she bore Jabal, and he was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. Interesting detail there. His brother's name, Zillan also bore, that's his other wife, Tubal Cain, and he was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. And so, let's see. And then Lamech, so we already mentioned that he had 2 wives, right? So he's already messing up there. Adah and Zillah hear, this is Lamech talking to his wives. Adah and Zillah, hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. It gets interesting because there's a time, it seems to be a time gap, right? So we're already way down in the lineage. And then it says, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called him Seth, for she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. To Seth also a son was born, and his name was Enosh. At this time, people began to call on the name of the Lord. So you had Adam, Cain, and then, so all the way from Adam to this Lamech dude is like 7 generations. But then it goes back to Adam, and it seems like he has Seth, right? Or no, he had, like he fathered Seth, right, through Eve. It's interesting that this is when they say people began to call on the name of the Lord. I've always wondered, Adam was created by God out of the dust of the earth. Eve was created out of Adam, out of his rib. Everyone else is born of sexual intercourse, like natural means, right? I'm going to take a drink of Monster real quick. And so Adam was created sinless and then sinned, right? But my point is, we talked about in episode 1 how it seems like God walking in the garden probably seemed to be a normal thing. And I think that was Jesus walking in the garden, because Jesus had an earthly body in his ministry. He has a glorified body in his resurrection. I think Jesus, when we get to Daniel and we see the 4th person walking around in the fire, I believe that was also Jesus. So my point is that Adam has these kids, and he's already got 2 murderers in his lineage, one being his son, one being great, right? And we're going to go over some ages later in this podcast. I really want to try to get to Noah tonight. But it seems like he was the closest to God. And what I mean by that is he was the first created. So he named all the animals. He would talk to God directly, like he should be able to pass all this down. And it's interesting that we're already finding issues. So we're going to go to Genesis chapter 5. We're not going to spend a lot of time in 5 because it's a lot of he begat, he begat, he begat. But I do want to point out some interesting things. This is the book of the generations of Adam. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God, repeating what we've already knew in Genesis chapter 1. He made him in the likeness of God, male and female he created them, and he blessed them and named them man, which is, I'm assuming, like mankind. Hold on, footnote, cool, let's click on that. Hebrew Adam. So that's where Adam gets his name from. I should have said that in the first podcast because I already knew that, but Adam, which is the pronunciation. We say Adam, it's Adam. Adam means man, right? So that's where he's the first one, so he's just man. Eve is the mother of all the living, right? And he blessed them and named them man when they were created. And when Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness and his image and named him Seth. I find this interesting that it says that about Seth. But I think it's because we've already been told about Cain and Abel that he's going to start this genealogy from Seth, which will also get us to the lineage of Jesus in future chronologies. And I want to say it's the Luke chronology that actually starts at Adam. I want to say that the Matthew one starts with Abraham. Don't quote me on that. We're going to get to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John at some point. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years. So that's 930 years. Quick question. Leave it in the comments. Are we counting 930 years? And this is just a curiosity question. Are we counting 930 years from Adam's creation? Or are we counting 930 years being that Adam was a fully formed man, right? So are we just taking into the account how old he was. Because when Adam was when I'm a day old, I'm literally a day old. When Adam's a day old, he's a full grown man. Just something to think about. Not combating the scriptures. I've just always wondered that. Did Adam live on earth for 930 years, or are 20 of those already factored in because he wasn't created as a 1 day old, or as a 0 day old on his first day, right? Seth fathered Enosh. Enosh 107 years, other sons and daughters. Hold on. Yeah, and he had other sons and daughters, Adam said. So we glossed over the Cain finding a wife in a city. Listen, if the biblical account is truthful and Adam and Eve were the first 2 humans and everyone came through them and then through Noah later, because he's the only one that survived the flood, and we'll get to that too, then brothers and sisters or relatives were procreating before the Mosaic law to populate the earth. That's how it would have had to happen. You can go and do a whole thing of where it wasn't a problem, because after sin, it probably took a while for the genetic gene pool to get fully corrupted. And so now, like, if relatives have relations and they have a baby, it usually has issues, right? So I don't want to get into that, but Cain married his sister, most likely, or a cousin. And once again, we're not given a timeline of how long it took Cain to kill Abel, how many children and people they had, and they probably moved off and made a city. There's whole other scenarios and theories about God created like the Neanderthals and they built a city, but these are like Adam's line is like the made in God's image line. I don't subscribe to that. There's no proof for that. It's nowhere in the text. You can pull it out of either Isaiah 14 or Ezekiel 28, and when it talks about Satan and the kings and the nations, but it's a stretch. So I'm not going to make that stretch. So Adam had lots and lots of kids because there was no contraception back then. There were no condoms. There was no birth control. They were, and they were genetically still superior, right? So when they were knowing each other, they were having babies, lots of them. And they lived these long years. Some people say these years are symbolic, but the years seem specific. Let's see. So Seth lives 912 years. There's a whole lot of genealogies. There's a guy named Jared. Okay, yeah, so Jared fathers, so we're going to skip down to 18. When Jared had lived 162 years, he fathered Enoch. So people are having children in their hundreds consistently. Like, it's not an issue. Like, it doesn't seem to be an issue. Like, nowadays, like, well, first off, we don't live that long. Second off, if you have children after, like, 34, 35, there's higher risk for, like, autism and stuff like that, right? And so, so Jared fathers Enoch at 100 and, I think that's 62 years. Okay, yeah. I'm supposed to wear glasses, people, so. When Enoch lived 65 years, he fathered Methuselah. Enoch walked with God. Let's see what that footnote says. Septuagint says that he pleased God, right? And after he fathered Methuselah 300 years and had other sons and daughters, thus all the days were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, or pleased God, and he was not, for God took him. There's dispute on what that actually means. Methuselah lived 187 years and fathered Lamech. Lamech lived 182 years and fathered Noah. So Enoch is the great grandfather of Noah, because it goes Methuselah, it goes Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah. So son, father, yeah, great grandfather, right? There's something very interesting in this genealogy that relates to the flood, and that is, we're going to get to it in Genesis 6, but when God commands Noah to build the ark, it seems to imply when God says something about, and we're going to read it, so we'll clarify it, but he says that man's days are numbered at 120 years. And I always thought that meant that that's the longest people can live, but then that would be contradictory because people after the flood live a little longer. Now, the ages do shrink once we get to like Abraham. Like once we start getting further closer to Abraham, the lifespans decrease because sin has entered the world. We're no longer perfect. We're still in God's image, but we're separated, and so all of nature's groaning, as Paul says. So we're not going to be living, right, to be 900 years old. It just stops. When God tells Noah to build the ark, and it says man's days are numbered at 120 years, I think he's saying it's 120 years until I send the flood and wipe them out. The year of the flood, Methuselah dies. So it seems to be that Methuselah was also someone that was pleasant in the eyes of God because he died so he wouldn't be on the ark. Let's see. Oh, when Lamech had lived 182 years, he fathered a son and called his name Noah, saying, out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. That is a very interesting thing to say, knowing what we know about Noah. Lamech lived to be like 700 something years old. So now we're going to go to Genesis 6. All right, give me 1 second. I want to just see if this is still recording on the audio. Yes, it is. Let's see. Let's go to Genesis chapter 6. Hold on. Did we? Yeah, because 4 was Cain and Abel. 5 was the genealogy we just kind of went through. That's kind of how we're going to go through genealogies. We're not going to go name by name, but I want to point out the thing. So far in the story, God creates the heavens and the earth. He creates us in his image. He has made man as his image. He said, don't eat from the tree, the knowledge of good and evil. We eat from the knowledge of tree and evil. We're driven out of the garden. Adam and Eve start having a bunch of kids. Cain kills Abel. There's some wicked people. There's some people that walk with God. And now we're getting to Genesis 6. So we've gotten to the birth of Noah, and we're 27 minutes and 29 seconds, 30 seconds into the podcast. So we should be able to cover Noah, but Genesis 6, we're going to spend some time here because there's a lot that goes into Genesis 6. When man began, and this is Genesis chapter 6, verse 1. When man began to multiply on the face of the land and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days. This says giants, and I think that's from the Septuagint. I want to say that the word Nephilim actually in the Hebrew means the fallen ones. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. I want to stop there. Who are these sons of God that Moses is writing about in Genesis 6? And who are the Nephilim? Let's ponder that. There's two views. View one is that the Nephilim were fallen angels that cohabitated with women and produced a race of hybrid individuals that were giants. We know that there's giants in the Promised Land. We know there's giants in the time of David. The other view is that the sons of God married the sinful daughters of other men, and these became like mighty kings. Let's flesh this out. We have Noah, and so Noah has a wife, And then they have three sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, or Japheth. And each one of those three sons has a wife. I do want to say it is kind of odd that Noah's only mentioned having three sons. Now, maybe he just had three sons, or maybe he had some really wicked kids too. All we know is that actually, let's read a little further and then I'll come back to this. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of the heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him in his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot man, whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of heaven, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So think about that. We are probably 1,200 years from the fall until now. And by now, I mean now in the story that we're at Noah and God's like, I want to wipe it all out. My question is, if it's just people sinning, why is God flooding the earth? And why is he wiping out all the animals? Why the animals? Now, obviously, we're going to find out he's going to put some animals on this thing called an ark of every kind of animal, right? The local flood theory bothers me only because if this language is hyperbolic, it's extremely hyperbolic. And when Moses wrote this, I do understand the point of when they say the face of the earth, are talking about the known earth, right? Now, the earth was obviously still the same side. So as we go through the flood, keep those things in mind. By the way, back to the Nephilim, back to the fallen angels, I hold that view. I think the Seth view is just weak. The view, not the people who believe in it. Like, at the end of the day, stuff like the Nephilim and the fallen angels and how old is the universe and pre-trib, mid-trib. The thing is that the most important event in history has already happened, and the second most important event is coming in the future, and that is the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and that is his second coming. Everything in between, I am willing to be wrong on, minus the fact that Jesus is part, like the Trinity is off limits for me. Like the triune Godhead, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. I cannot be convinced out of that. Jesus as God and as man cannot be talked out of that. The inerrancy of Scripture, you can't talk me out of that. But we can have these secondary disagreements, and I've heard good arguments on both sides of many issues, right? It just makes more sense to me that if God is wiping out the majority of all creation, even if it is in a certain region, that I would think he had a really, really, really good reason. Let me paint you a picture. So, let's go with the Nephilim view, and let's look at it from Satan's perspective. So, we read in Genesis 3 about the curse put on Satan, and it seems to imply that it's the first messianic prophecy. The seed of the woman, the virgin birth of Jesus, the Messiah, the awaited Messiah, will come to redeem mankind of their sin and forever defeating sin and death. And Satan's already cursed. He's already fallen. Okay, so if I'm Satan and my initial dream, passion, goal, if you look at Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28, I will ascend to the throne of God. Like, I will be like the Most High. And it's the 5 eyes, right? We'll get to that at some point. But basically, Satan understands he can't be God, but he wants to be on the same level as God. Just because I'm fallen doesn't mean that if I'm Satan that goal has changed. So if I'm Satan, what would I want to do? wouldn't I want to try to keep this Messiah from coming? And as we go through this story, the narrative of the Bible as a story, we're going to see this constant theme of the work of Satan to try to keep Messiah from coming. And he's going to do that multiple different times. He's going to even try to have the Messiah killed before the appointed time. He's going to do all these things that try to stop this plan. If I'm Satan, what's the best way to keep the Messiah from coming? Mess up the gene pool. Send my demons, and I don't know how they would have done it. But if they were able to, the fallen angels were able to come down and habitate men and corrupt the gene pool, and then God has to wipe out the whole planet to get rid of this abomination. But if Noah and the other 7 members of his family are undefiled, which means they're not mixed with any of this Nephilim giants nonsense, then Jesus can still come. That's just a view, but it makes sense. Now, it is completely 1000% possible that people had just gotten so wicked and turned so far from God that he had to wipe out everybody but Noah and his family. That's also possible. That's also, I mean, that's what I grew up thinking as a kid. Like, dang, they must have just been really, really, really bad. I mean, God, several times in the life of Moses, talks about wiping out the Israelites. So it's something to think about. And I know that sounds like sci-fi and all that, but I was surprised that many, many people hold to that view. And it doesn't make that view true. It's just, I thought it was a fringe view. No, like the early church fathers seem to, I mean, there's something weird going on in Genesis 6. Just something really odd. All right. So Noah and the flood. So actually, let's read this from the top, because something interesting is in the passage. This is why we read it. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God, and Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence, okay? And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their ways on the earth. I wonder when it says all flesh, if it's just talking about humans. That's kind of why I found that interesting. And God said to Noah, I had determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. And this is how you are to make the length of the ark, 300 cubits, its breadth 50 cubits, its height 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark and finish it to a cubit above, and set the door on the ark in its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks, for behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. That's why it's hard for me to believe in a local flood. But I would love to, if someone has a rebuttal to that, and having read the Hebrew, let me know, because I would be interested in that. Everything that is on the earth shall die. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you, and all living things of all flesh. You shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, of every creeping thing on the ground according to its kind. 2 of every sort shall come, and you shall keep them alive. So this is where people think that there were only 2 of every animal on the ark. But in the next chapter, we're going to get more specific. Also take with you every sort of food that is eaten, and store it up. It shall serve as food for you and for them. Noah did this in all that God commanded him. I don't think people were eating meat at this point, or they weren't supposed to. So that's probably just like vegetables and fruits and stuff, right? But maybe I don't know that to be a fact. All right. So we're going to the ark now. Then the Lord said to Noah, go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, the male and his mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and his mate. 7 pairs. So that's 14 of all clean animals and 2 that are not clean. Now, we're not really told because the law hasn't been given, so I'm guessing they knew what was clean and what was not clean. Maybe got it. I mean, I never saw that like that before, but we don't really have that distinction laid out for us in Scripture until the Mosaic Law. For in 7 days I will send rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and every living thing that I have made, and I will blot out from the face of the ground. And Noah did all that the Lord commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters came on the earth. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his son's wife with them, they escaped the flood. Okay. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. All right, so we are in verse 11. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the windows of heaven were opened. That's important. Because a local flood, let's say that it rained for 40 days straight. It's a lot of rain. But if the foundations of the deep are broken, is this where we get the Mariana Trench from? There's a big trench in the middle of, I want to say it's the Atlantic Ocean. Or maybe that's the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. Anyways, there's a big trench and there's mountain ridges and all that. Is this how plate tectonics happen? I don't know. And the rain fell upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights on the very same day of Noah and his sons, Shem and Ham and Japheth, and Noah's wife, and the 3 wives of his sons and them entered the ark, they and every beast according to its kind. All right, verse 15. They went into the ark with Noah 2 and 2 of all flesh. This is why sometimes reading from the ESV is a little tricky, because it really is like word for word. Like, I'm not saying, but I do want to read verse 16. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in, and God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in. So they go into the ark, and God shuts the door. God puts them in the ark. Like, they get on the ark, God shuts the door. So nothing else is going to get in. The flood continued 40 days on the earth, and the water increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters, and the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. That seems like a worldwide flood. So at the very least, wherever people were living, it seems to be that the earth was flooded. Now, I've heard it say that the people in New Zealand and China and all that, and South America and North America. And it also depends on if you subscribe to the plate tectonics theory, where if the earth is billions of years old and then the continent shifted over time, or did this event cause that? I don't know. I don't know where I stand on that. And I'm getting a little sleepy from doing this, but we're going to get through the flood. So I think it was a worldwide flood. I think there's a lot of archaeological evidence for that, the Grand Canyon, some other stuff, and it could have just been a local flood. But every culture seems to have this story, because if it's just a local flood, then was it just these people in the area that were really, really, really bad? Like, what about the rest of the earth? We're not told. The English reading of this seems to indicate it was a worldwide flood. I could be proven wrong on that. Everything on the dry land in whose nostril was the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left and those who were with him on the ark. And the waters prevailed on the earth for 150 days. It just seems to keep repeating this over and over and over and over and over again, like all life, everything that has the breath of life, which is humans, because God breathed into Adam to make him a living being, to make him in his image, right? I can't remember how the Forgotten Jesus podcast put it, but they put it a different way. But yeah, so I believe it was a worldwide flood. I also believe that if you don't believe it's a worldwide flood and you put your faith in Jesus, then we're also going to go to heaven. All right, Genesis chapter 8. But God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark, and God made a wind blow over the earth, and the water subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were closed, and the rain from the heavens was restrained, and the waters receded from the earth continually. And at the end of 150 days, the water had abated. And in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to a rest on the mountain of Ararat. And the waters continued to abate until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. This is really wordy. At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made and sent forth the raven. It went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. Then he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters had subsided from the face of the ground. But the dove found no place to set her foot, and she returned to him in the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. I am kind of curious what happened to that raven. Yeah, because does the raven just fly until like the water recedes? That doesn't seem to make sense. But I don't know. He waited another days, and he sent forth the dove out of the ark, and the dove came back to him in the evening, and behold, in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth, and he waited another 7 days, and went forth the dove, and she did not return to him any more. In the 601st year, in the 1st month, in the 1st day of the month, the waters were dried from the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. In the 2nd month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth had dried out. Then God said to Noah, Go forth from the ark, you and your wife and your sons wives with you. Bring out with you every living creature that is with you, of all flesh, birds and animals, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may swarm on the earth, and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. So he says it again. Even though he just wiped out what seems to be 99.9% of the planet, because they were really bad, he tells Noah and Noah's sons, hey, go be fruitful and multiply. He says it again. So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife with his sons' wives with him, and every beast and every creeping thing and every bird and everything that moves on the earth went out by families from the ark. All right, God's covenant with Noah. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. They keep repeating that he's not. If it was a regional flood, why this covenant? This covenant does not make a lot of sense if it's a regional flood. It just doesn't. Because it's, if all these other people live, that this is a drastic covenant. I'm just not buying the narrative of it being a regional flood. The Bible spends more chapters 6, 7, and 8 to talk about this flood event than it does covering creation and what seems to be 1,200 years of history. We get 1,200 years of history, and it might not be, I think it's 1,200. From Adam, from the fall into Noah, we get 5 chapters of 1,200 years of history, and in one event that takes 1 year, we get the flood in 3 chapters. And it just keeps repeating all flesh, everything that has the breath of life, all the creatures on the earth. Like, I don't know. That's just the view that I hold. So some takeaways from this. Oh, and then like Noah, we're gonna cover the rest of Noah's life in a future podcast. Like, so we're gonna talk about like what happens when Noah comes out of the ark. I mean, we've got a little bit, but we've got him out of the ark, and then there's an event that happens, and someone gets cursed, and then we're gonna have the table of nations. And then we're going to get to the Tower of Babel. I don't want to squeeze all that into this episode. I'm shocked that it's under an hour. We're at 50 minutes, and we've already got through the flood. I thought there was going to be much more I wanted to say, but number one, I think the flood happened. Number two, I think it was worldwide. Number three, I think that it was because of the extreme. I mean, God says it's corruption and violence on the earth, right? But it's a lot of people for God to kill over people were just sinning, because people are always going to sin. Even once we're saved, we're going to mess up, we're going to commit sins. But a lot of this it is important to put yourself in a ancient context when discussing these events, right? Because you have sacrifices, and you have altars, and you have, we're going to talk, and then there's circumcision, and then there's especially once we get to like Israel, we have like a Jewish context, right? And so far in the story, God created the heavens and the earth, created man in his image, man sinned, man's kicked out of the garden, a bunch of generations happen, and within 1,200 years, the earth is so bad that God has to destroy it. Or God decides to destroy it. I'm not going to say what God had to do. So God destroys it, and then there's this giant flood. And we're now 8 chapters through Genesis and 2 episodes, which I think is pretty good. So the next podcast, like I said, we're going to talk about Noah coming off of the ark, and we're going to talk about an event that happens, and sorry about my computer going off. And then we're going to talk about the Tower of Babel and the significance. And so that might actually be a shorter podcast, because I want to start Abram before he becomes Abraham. I want to start him on his own episode. I don't want to jump into Abraham in the middle of an episode like he's basically the patriarch of the nation of Israel. So I'm not going to do that to Abraham. And he's considered the father of 3 major religions, even though Abraham belongs to us, the Christians, right? No shots at the Jews or the Muslims, but me personally believe that the Old Testament is married to the New Testament, and this is God's plan was for God's intent was for Jesus to come and the Jews to accept him, but obviously that didn't happen. So it's not. Let me take that back. I don't want to say what God's plan and intention was, because he knew all along that the nation of Israel would reject Jesus. But the point is, Father Abraham, he gets to start. We start talking about him on his own episode, because he's going to get a couple of episodes probably, because there's a lot that goes on in Scripture. But this has been another episode of Christ in a Culture War. My name is Jesse Williams. This is the series, The Narrative of the Bible as a Story. This is episode 2. We might give it some kind of catchy title, but for now we'll just call it Cain and Abel to the flood. Cain, Abel, and a flood, right? I'll come up with a cool title for it, and then this will be posted this evening. It's not super late, I don't think. So God bless you. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, leave them in the comments below. Be respectful in the comments. I do not want to have to turn the comments off. I don't care if you disagree, but just respect each other, please. God bless you. Have a wonderful day, and peace out.